What's happening, everybody? It's your favorite leather craftsman, R.D. Muhammad, plugging y'all in with this hot information real quick and these hot tips. Now, this is a technique that I have done for a long time. I think this might be the first video that I've done one to show you guys how this is actually done. I started doing this guitar strap and I just stopped in the middle of it because this was what I wanted you guys to see. A lot of times you'll see other crafters where the backgrounding work is dyed a darker color, and then they will antique the carving and the tooling work on the top. But you want your background to be dark. Now, there are two ways to do this, ladies and gentlemen. One way is the old school way. I'm going to show you this way, where we just paint the background with the paintbrush, which you want to make sure that you have a pretty steady hand when doing this so it doesn't get onto your tooling work. Now, this will require you to be very patient, and this is just one way of doing it. And this is where you're dyeing the background work, but you're not touching the tooling work and the carving work. Now, this is very tedious work. I wouldn't tell you to go out and spend any money on a painter's tray and all of that stuff when you guys already know my motto: minimize your spending on the front end to maximize your profits on the back end. But this is one way of how it's done. You just take your paintbrush and you just go right down to your background work, making sure not to drag your paintbrush over top of your tooling work. This can set your work apart, but it also requires you to have a steady hand. Make sure you get down into all of your cuts, get that dye down in there so it causes that separation when you get ready to seal this for your antique gelling. So when you get ready to resist, I think that's the proper name. And you're just taking your time, making sure that your dye gets in all of your cuts, and just have a steady hand on doing it. Now, this, if you're going to use this technique, I would encourage you to spend some good money on getting some good quality paint brushes, because you want your dye is a little bit more liquid than traditional paint, but you want those paint brushes, the bristles, to hold enough dye to where it will not overrun. Now, this will take some practice. I would encourage you to just background you up some sample pieces and start practicing there until you get a good, comfortable feel and flow of how you'll work it, if you want to use your paintbrush. Now, sometimes you can, and this still doesn't stop you, even if you want to start painting your flowers and your leaves and stems and scrolls and stuff, which is just more added value to your projects. But this will get you real comfortable with not over dyeing into your artwork. And it's just putting it right there on your background work only. Make sure you don't overload your brushes so it doesn't get onto your artwork. Now, doing it with this brush, you want to make sure also that you knock off enough of the dye, especially if you're bringing it across the project so it doesn't accidentally drip. So don't be afraid to knock off the excess and go back over it again. It's better to start with a little bit and progress to a larger amount as you continue to go on, because some places you might miss in your background work. So you want to go in and make sure that you go back and fill that in so you have a nice even coverage. And just take your time. Now, this is one way. This is definitely one way to do it. And you can see how you can just barely pull that up in there. Now, the dye that's in your bristles will bleed off of the bristles the more you push that brush down, but you want to make sure that your hand is steady. Now, for a lot of those where your hand is not steady, or you might doubt yourself a little bit, let me show you guys the other one, which is a little bit more controlled, a lot more controlled. The one thing that you have to worry about on that particular technique or doing that particular skill or technique is making sure that you don't squeeze your bottle too much. Now, here you go. Here's the second one. These little pippets, you can get these little bottles. They have a little needle on the end of them. You can buy these. I bought these off of Amazon, and I just took some masking tape to label them, the color that I use in there. And this one here, now the thing with, if you're going to use the bottles and the pippets, I think that's what they call them, pippets, these little needle ends, you would have to do a little bit of adjusting with these, and make sure that light, see what you guys can see. You want to do a little bit of the controlling of the flow on the dye with the needle. And that's just simply taking a pair of needle nose pliers and crimping the end. Now, this is what requires some trial and error. So definitely get you a scrap piece, fill your bottles up. They come with a little pipette funnel where you can put on the top and then pour your dye in here. And they come with this little cap. So if you're not using it, definitely make sure you put these back on so you don't have to worry about any spillage or any loss of product. Now, I like this one, these, in my tight areas inside of my scrolls where I don't really want to use my brush, and you guys can see how that comes out. You just squeeze a little bit and just move your needle along. Kind of try to put them in your cuts with your swivel knife and just barely squeeze. Now, again, you can control the flow of how much dye comes out of these with a pair of needle nose pliers and just crimp. Then you can take your paintbrush and just take your paintbrush and fill in the spots that might not have gotten any dye. And you can take a fine point paintbrush, the one that has the bristles are very tiny, or a fine point like a pen, and you can spread that to the rest of your project. Great technique to add to your crafting, and this will get all of your background in. Now, when you're doing this, make sure that your beveling and your backgrounding is definitely deep enough, recessed enough, so it would definitely go down in all of your cuts and grooves. Now, you don't have to get all the way close and tight, or if you have that fear of getting too close to your artwork, because when you get ready to antique this, you can allow your antique gel to fill in a lot of places that you might have missed. But you guys can definitely see how we use this in making your artwork a little bit more. I think I'm just going to dye all of that. That's my maker's mark there. But in your larger areas, you can use the paintbrush because you can cover more area. And in your tight places, you can use the pippets and the brushes. And this is strictly and solely just to paint the background and work. And it leaves your artwork the natural color. So if you want to tan or paint it a different color, whatever you desire, or whatever the vision is in your head, it just allows you a little bit to give you something else to give your customers. I would definitely play around with this for a little while. Can't even remember who I was watching or what class I took where I picked this up because it's been so long ago. It's quite possible it could have been from an old George Hertz video. I can't remember, so don't let me get in it. I want to give the right person the right credit where I saw it from. But it could have just been I was just watching somebody doing some work on Facebook or YouTube, and I'm the type of person to where if I like it, I'll try it. Or if I can add it and give myself something else to give me a little bit different look or creativity. And in this industry, ladies and gentlemen, nobody owns one particular, I don't think. Now, unless it's their artwork. Now, your artwork, you definitely don't want to copy somebody else's artwork. Some crafters are known for their artwork and not necessarily the tooling technique or the dyeing technique. Because I don't think anybody can get in trouble on how they dye it. Now, some people over the times have come up with an easier way, which somebody did with the little pippet bottles. They saw that this was paintbrushing was a little bit too much, so they went and found the pippets and saw how easy it was to use these as opposed to the paintbrush. It doesn't take as much time, but you definitely want to make sure that you get your flow tip right, especially in tight places. Because if you don't get that flow tip pinched just right, it can bleed over into something that you don't want to be bled into with the dye. And this is how we do it, ladies and gentlemen. Very cool, not too hard. But the one thing that I can tell you is make sure that your backgrounding and your beveling is steep and deep so it doesn't bleed onto your artwork. Your dye will stop at the cut and at the bevel. I don't think I'm going to make you guys watch the whole entire process, but just do enough so you can understand how it works. And this is another reason why proper casing, the proper cut, the proper bevel all plays a part into the finish. One thing about that I've learned about this leather crafting industry, you can't skip on anything. You have to make sure that you do every process right because everything will come out in the finished product. Even when you're painting, make sure that you get, and then I just sit back and I check it, make sure that there's no natural leather. See, like right here, I see a little natural leather speck coming through. So you just hit that back. There's another one there. And just push that brush down in there. Now, again, your gel will also fill in because you're going to completely cover your project with the gel. So the gel might can go down in there and fill in a lot of your missed places too. But while you're here, just go ahead and cover it with your, now see, in this, getting into this tight part of the scroll, that's what that fine paintbrush, that fine tip paintbrush is going to do. It's going to allow you to get into those tight little corners. Your pippet will do the same. Now, those pippets aren't expensive. Again, I got my set. You can get I think I got the 12 pack for it was under $10. I know that. And You just play around. Now, another thing I can tell you about those needle points, the tips on your pippets, you have very little room to recrimp. So start with just a little pressure. Get you a bottle, put you some water in there, and go over a piece of leather, and it'll flow. Your water and your dye is pretty much about the same consistency. So pull you out a little, background you out a little piece, put you some water in there, and see how the flow is, but crimp it soft. So I've seen some people take nail clippers and crimp it just a little bit. And then if the water is still coming out too heavy, you can go back and crimp it again until you can get the right amount of flow coming out of that. And be also leery of not going back over your dyed part because it's pools, really. And it can have a tendency of getting on your gloves or on your hand and coming off on your artwork. So I got to clean this up and kind of dial that dye back a little bit. Now you can get some reducer. You can get some reducer and it won't completely remove the dye, but it will lighten it up a little bit too as well. And you just put your little dye reducer on there. All right. I think that got y'all, family. Y'all see pretty much how we do it. You can either paintbrush the background by hand or you can invest in these little pippets. And again, these you can get 12 to a pack, 24 to a pack. I got the 12 pack because we all primarily use the same basic dye color. So you got 3 browns. You got dark brown, medium brown, light brown. Then you might have a timber brown. You might have a saddle tan, a British tan. But however many different bottles of dye you have, that's how many of these little pippets you want to get. And this is about a ½ ounce bottle. That's all you need. And then just crimp that in. I don't know if you guys can see tip on that where I crimped it. I have to get a piece of paper or something. But it's basically one side is completely closed and the other side just has that dye dripping out. So when I squeeze this, you just want to be aware of how much pressure you put on the squeeze. And you can really get a piece covered and then you let that fully dry. Then you come back with your resist, whether you use a satin sheen, tan coat, or whatever the case may be. And then you come back with your antique gel and take the gel and just get all down in all your cuts. Whatever little pieces you might miss, but practice. That's the name of the game, ladies and gentlemen. Practice makes progress. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes progress. And the more you practice, the more progress you'll get, and then the closer you'll get to your desired outcome. I'll see you guys on the next one. Keep crafting.